seasons. And so a 33-player squad isn't quite a surprise, but I think some of the names on that list were quite a surprise.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest thing you can do if you're Joe Montemurro is immediately, scour through as much talent as possible. Understand that this is a Matildas team that's in a transitional phase, so get as much data as you can against opponents who, are obviously there to be that kind of starting mark in the Joe Montemurro era of the Matildas. So I think everything is kind of set up for a lot of success in that respect. I guess the frustrating thing is, it's not because they're friendlies, we can't take too much away from the result. The other issue being that data and how it's analysed and, what that kind of turns into going forward, we simply won't really know, but we can speculate a lot. And that's also the fun part of a window like this is we can just speculate and talk.
It's what keeps us in a job, right?
That's right, yeah.
So, of note, Steph Catley, Caitlin Ford, Katrina Gorry, and Courtney Vine are still under personal leave. They're not part of camp. Courtney Vine obviously has been under personal leave for quite some time, but Joe Montemurro was full of praise for Courtney Vine and basically said that she's in the sights going forward as they come into the Asian Cup. So presumably Courtney Vine is selected as soon as she feels ready to come back, and whether she makes the final 23 is another question. Mary Fowler obviously out injured still with the ACL. Carly Johnson, Tamika Yallop are both rehabbing injuries. And there's no return date for Sam Kerr, but she is progressing in the right direction. Football Australia staff, Joe Montemurro, are all keeping in touch with Chelsea across Sam Kerr's return to play. Of the 33-player squad, 14 of them will be in action throughout the window, and then there's a handful of players that will be there for Slovenia only and a handful for Panama only. Of the 14 that are around for the entire window, the name that stands out to me the most as probably a surprise is the fact that Alex Chidiac is finally been recalled to the national team. And then for the Panama only side of things, a number of local A-Leagues talent, Alexia Apostolakis, Chloe Berryhill, Sally James, Jess Nash, Adriana Taranto, and Grace Kalamu earning their first senior call-ups. But Jacinta Galabadarachi, she hasn't been seen in a national team camp for 3 years, Matt. Joe was asked about it at his press conference and said that he's been monitoring her for the last couple of years between her time at Celtic and at Sporting, that she's a talented player that is very special in 1v1 situations, and he's brought her in to see where she's at, and an opportunity to do so, given, as you said, not a lot of runtime into the Asian Cup. There's an extended window to work with. But I think a lot of people thought she would have been lost to Australia, given that she's eligible for 4 different nations. What do you think we might expect to see, just particularly with Galabadarachi?
Talent, just like a bucket load of talent. She very clearly possesses what it takes to play at this level. It's just obviously that the journey to get specifically into this situation as a Matilda has been so convoluted and so crazy. And I mean, Poletti, we were just talking off air. I mean, neither of us were able to kind of scratch up what all the fuss was about. And I personally had thought for a very long time that she was almost certainly going to declare for Argentina. And that was already kind of set in stone. So a name that is obviously very surprising. But again, going back to when she was with Perth, I've had my eye on Jacinta for a long time. And again, it's the talent, it's the reassurance. She is someone that has that ceiling. And it's time to show it, because again, the Matilda's team, they're in transition. And you just need that X factor of talent that no one really expects, or at least maybe isn't as well versed on in understanding the nuances of it. So yeah, I think it's definitely a pick for me that screams optimism and actually makes me very excited. But yeah, also one that you just kind of have to wait on, and I think that's also surmising a lot of the names in that squad in particular is all about really just that wait and see game of how the talent can manifest.
Yeah, and then of the Slovenia-only games, which are the first 2 games in the window, likes of Mackenzie Arnold, Ellie Carpenter, Kyra Cooney-Cross, Winnie Heatley, Remy Simpson, Alana Kennedy, Caitlin Torpy, they're sort of either just at the end of very long seasons or, in the middle of seasons in the case of the likes of Kennedy and Torpy. Sian Fryer makes a return from injury as well, so that could be quite interesting to see as well. The only goalkeeper who will be there for the entire 4 games is Tegan Micah. At this point, Matt, because I don't think I've had a chance to talk to you about this yet. It's Tegan Micah's net to lose, right?
I think again, it's just one of those things that is all about progressing and planning. Because I guess again, from a performance perspective, you would have to say so. But I think the biggest thing for me, biggest takeaway is you can't really overly depend on a window like this to determine who could actually really cut in and be a starting player, even if it's who's going to be the number one in net, right? So. I want to obviously say yes, she's been in brilliant form, but at the same time, I kind of think it would be a good time to rotate as well. And again, I would say that there's plenty of options, but also it's that balance of familiar names with Tegan. She's been kind of in the depth of the squad for a very very long time, and is sort of I think coming to her own to be a starting keeper. So it's tough. But it's not one that looking down the squad, it's not one that you really want to be too worried about if there's a bit of rotation again. Yada Wyman, someone that's very dependable. Mackenzie Arnold, again, speaks for itself. So,
Fair enough. Looking ahead to the games themselves, Joe Montemurro said it's an important camp to launch the next phase in the lead up to the Asian Cup. We've already touched on it. There's a 4-game series, and that is an AFC only quirk of this window, in part because this is the window that has been put aside for the AFC Asian Cup qualifiers to determine the remaining 8 teams that will join the AFC Women's Asian Cup to be held in Australia as the host nation. Australia have qualified, so they don't have to go through this process. With the Euros and other continental tournaments going on, it really has limited the amount of teams that are available, which is why we've got Slovenia and Panama coming out. Not exactly the greatest of competition in terms of competitive football. Panama were at the last World Cup, but I mean, if you look at the FIFA rankings, and I know Mike Burke has quite often said that she takes the rankings with a grain of salt because FIFA just allowed North Korea to sit there for half a decade during COVID, but it's not like a South Korea or a Japan or an England or Germany or a USA. They're not top tier nations. But what can we expect from? I'll start with the Slovenia series, Matt.
Look, probably the one I'm far less knowledgeable on for obvious reasons. But I think the one thing you can say is when you look at the rise of women's football globally, right? Obviously, Europe is a hotbed for that, and obviously when it comes to the increased depth that you get with more participation, better grassroots, programs for women to reach the elite level, a country like Slovenia is still very much at the heart of that. And that is the extent of any commentary I can really hover on them as a team. Far more looking forward to the Panama series because their attacking threats are so well established and have a career that I think would be actually pretty fairly bang on similar to a lot of what some of these A-League girls have had as well. So I think that's that's my outlook going into it. But I would be actually quite impressed if we did see, if we go back to the last kind of set of games, particularly in Western Australia, where that sort of Olympic qualifying series was set up for Australia to dominate it, and it was made for the girls to obviously have that big moment against the Philippines at a sold out Opera Stadium. When I refer back to that, I remember thinking on the Iran games and the Chinese Taipei games that it is tough from an AFC perspective to not have opponents that aren't just going to sit back and absorb pressure because they just don't have the talent, right? They don't have the talent in the numbers. Whereas I feel like with Slovenia, with a European opponent in particular, we're actually looking at a team that will actually be able to challenge the Matildas far more than an opponent of that sort of second or third tier Asian spec would.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I think that there is some positives to take from that. I think, particularly given the fact that it's a 4-game window, I am looking forward to seeing a lot of squad rotation. I don't think the starting 11 is set in stone by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, as much as you can with a new coach, as you said, you want to see everyone, you want to look at all the moving parts, but you're also trying to embed your systems and philosophies, right? And Montemurro has talked about, controlling the ball in most of his media appearances so far, in terms of the style and philosophy that they very much want to, dominate that. And do you think that's something they'll be able to do against Panama?
Absolutely. Because I think you get that kind of challenge and quality that a Panamanian 11 would bring, but you also, I think, get the ability to test the system, knowing that, again, a side like Panama, I think, far more attacking prowess than anything defensively going on, right? So when it comes to that the mode of attack, being on the front foot, I think ultimately in a game where across the 4 games we should see them really dominating and being, you know, the fancied side. When you're in control like that is when you can start to rotate. It's when you can start to really fluctuate with your system, try different things out, try players in different positions. And I mean, again, I go back to the Chinese Taipei and Iran games just because I covered so much of that series inside and out. It's just very easy for me to kind of reflect back to it. And, I think about Amy Sayer really breaking out for the first time, a call-up that she'd really, really waited for at that time. And they were just able to be so expressive and help her out, particularly in, I want to say it was the Iran game in particular where she really shone. So, again, that was just a series for me where I'm expecting something similar, but with a far better quality opponent. And I think it ultimately, in that sense, it's a balance of really good and it's a culmination of a lot of positives, net positives coming together. That is what I'm trying to say. The words aren't quite coming to me there, but
No, that's definitely fair. On Panama themselves, I'm not going to pretend like I've seen a lot of Panama outside of the Women's World Cup. But one thing that sort of sticks out to me was their final group stage game against France. I was sitting like right at the back of, if you're familiar with the layout of the Sydney Football Stadium, the cove end of the ground. So I was seated directly behind Marta Cox as she delivered that free kick in the 2nd minute of the game. I was watching it curling in the air, like just an absolute attacking, it's brilliant attacking set piece. But they didn't win a game. They finished the group with a -8 goal differential. So I guess looking specifically at Panama, what do you think they'll bring, Matt?
Look, I think, to be honest, most of my reference is still fairly World Cup based, and I was there in Perth. It was actually on my birthday, the game against Jamaica, and I was flying out to Melbourne that night. So that was a pretty hectic day. Coming up against the Swabi sisters in defence, and obviously Bunny Shaw as the starting 9 was always going to be a bit of a task. But I remember being especially infatuated with the way that Riley Tanner conducted her business. Someone who is a collegiate player that through her descendants was able to qualify for Panama, and someone that, again, really meets that mould of coming from a very similar kind of mindset, a very similar standard of football to a lot of those A-League players or, USL players for a North American context where, they are producing some of these players at that level, the USL and the collegiate system, who are, through their descendants going off to play for countries all over the world. There's been a collegiate player who's gone to play for Tahiti. There's been collegiate players that have gone to play, quite obviously for a country like the Philippines. It's a very, very good level of football, and I'm imagining a lot of that influence is going to be imparted on the Panamanian side that we see. Which again, it's not the worst level. It sounds bad, but it's really not the worst level to be coming up against in this kind of game at this kind of level. So I think it's quite a positive step to take.
Yeah, I'm hoping for good things. I fully expect, I guess in contrast to what I said earlier, I do expect these to be competitive games from both Slovenia and Panama. They may be friendlies, but the reality is that regardless of whether it's friendly or a competitive competition, when you come up against a side like Australia, you want to put your best foot forward. You want to impress. And that's what we saw from Panama at the World Cup, was just despite them being outclassed against all 3 opposition, they still kept putting their foot forwards. And you telling that story, Matt, it reminded me of my trip to Perth for the World Cup. The only time I've been to Perth previously, I flew in on a Wednesday morning to watch Ireland and Canada because I decided I wanted to follow Quinn around the country while they were in Australia, and then I flew out to Brisbane the next morning via Melbourne. I flew out that night via Melbourne to go watch the Matildas play Nigeria the next day. So I am at least you didn't have to fly in that morning before you flew out.
Yeah, crazy.
Adriana Taranto and Grace Kalamo, as already mentioned, they're getting their first senior call-ups. Grace Kalamo was named into Alex Apakis' 32-player training camp for the Young Matildas in Sydney. Given she's at the Panama Games only, I expect that she'll be in camp for at least part of that. The 32-player squad absolutely loaded with talent for the Young Matildas training camp. And something that, with the fact that we haven't had Tony Gustafsson for a while now, obviously, he wasn't based in Australia. Joe Montemurro said he's going to be based in Australia, and while he won't be able to have a look hands-on at this Young Matildas camp, he's going to be able to liaise with the Parkers. I wouldn't be surprised at all with some of this younger talent, particularly as he's looking to scout. I would not be surprised to see Joe Montemurro at an NPL game, but in the not too distant future, Matt, given his tendencies to be very hands-on and very scouting.
Yeah, and you would just have a certain level of knowledge that is invaluable in terms of understanding the game, understanding the grassroots level. We've sort of come back to the conversation of why the coaching decision took a very long time. But I think just having someone that understands Australian football inside and out and the levels that were involved in that, I think is a really, really special thing. We talk about, particularly on the under-20s, and I mean, this is a bit of a side tangent, but I just wanted to say, Leah Blaney's exit and the fact that this is a team that actually had a really, really high ceiling and then failed to really, really underachieve at those under-20s World Cups twice over. I do wonder where the future of the program's going right from the bottom up at the moment. There's a lot of intrigue in that. But again, I think it's the tactical nous mixed in with that understanding of Australian football through its very depth that will actually keep the women's program as a whole from the youth levels all the way up in a very healthy position going forward. So I think the current regime that's in charge from coaching all the way down, I think is it's done. They've done really, really shrewdly in the recruitment and matching certain coaches with certain types of players at certain types of levels. And you talk about the scouting. It's brilliant. It's invaluable. So really looking forward to seeing the fruits of that labour over time.
Any final thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I did just want to make a comment, particularly about the fixture at Hands Oval. As someone that obviously is a proud Western Australian and who knows the area inside and out, I just wanted to say I think it's incredibly beautiful that a high enough caliber opponent in a World Cup team is coming to play the Matildas, but the Matildas themselves as a team, what they represent, going out to a regional area like Bunbury, where people have a lot of really backwards opinions. I'm like to have LGBT role models in an area like that, to have women and girls to be able to have sporting role models in an area like that. I just think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's a really, really underrated and not really spoken about element of this that is going to be really what the Matildas going out to a regional centre would mean at a time like this. So for me, it's invaluable. All of those upgrades to Hands Oval as well. It's turned into a really beautiful facility, and again, I'm just really, really looking forward to taking that road trip, having a bit of a weekend of myself at my accommodation in Bunbury, and just really, really looking forward to that game in particular.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that game as well. I had the option that I gave myself of I can go for 2 of the 4 games. I can't afford to do the whole window, and I very much chose the 2 Panama games in part because of the ability to go see the Matildas at a new stadium in a new part of the world that I've never been to before. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, a part of the world I will probably never have a chance to return to just because there's so many places to go, so many things to do. And so if I have an excuse to go there, it's definitely worth checking out. But thank you so much for tuning in today for this Matildas squad review and sort of brief preview looking ahead to the Slovenia and Panama series. If you missed the latest episode of the Dubcast, I will put a link for that into the description. We'll have the video out on Monday for that here on the YouTube channel where Burke and I discussed how we would improve the A-League women. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll be back after the first Slovenia game with a review of that one. Enjoy the rest of your day.